Nuts are wacky to shop for, all right? So we hear that we need to have omega-3 rich nuts. So that's really important, right? Well, let's go in. I've got the list of nuts that I want to grab. We're going to head into Trader Joe's. I'm going to grab them. And then after I grab each little bag of different kinds of nuts, I'm going to take it back to the studio. We're going to analyze the omega-3, omega-6 profile so you know which nuts are best when we're looking at omega. So here we are looking for the top omega-3 rich nuts. You don't have to shop at Trader Joe's. We're just using this as a reference point. So let's head on in. My man. There's some perks if you treat people with respect and you're nice. They kind of turn a blind eye to me filming here. We'll keep it quick though, just to be respectful of everybody and keep everyone safe. Okay, first one I gotta grab is some almonds. Let's check them out. In this case, I'm gonna go for the dry roasted almonds, and I will explain. Okay, these do have a very high omega-6 profile and a relatively low omega-3 profile. So let's break them down a little bit. So we got our almonds. But before I can dive into the detail on that, I gotta give you a little bit of science on the omega-3, omega-6. I'm sorry, you just have to arm yourself with science if you wanna get the best results possible. It's just the way it goes. All right, omega-3s and omega-6s are very, very important, okay? Omega-3s and omega-6s compete for the same enzyme in our body. So what that means is that it doesn't matter how much omega-3s you're taking in. If you have too many omega-6s, it takes up all of the enzyme known as desaturase, so the omega-3s can't even get utilized. That's why when everyone talks about omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, they're drilling it into our heads so much. It's very important. That ratio is super important. So the biggest problem we face with nuts is almost all of them are higher in omega-6s than omega-3s. So you're always going to run into that problem. So knowing that, this is going to throw a wrench in how we explain these nuts. So almonds. 0 omega-3s, zilch, goose egg, nada, okay? 3.5 grams per 1 ounce serving of omega-6s, okay? So pretty terrible ratio when it comes down to omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. Does that mean it's a terrible, terrible nut? It just means you want to have it in moderation, but we face a big issue with keto. Almost everything is made with almond flour, almost everything is almond butter because it's better than peanut butter, so why not have more of it? Well, now that we're learning that other nuts are slightly better in different categories, we don't have to all the time. Word to the wise though, if you do get almonds, get them dry roasted, not roasted in any other oil, okay? So they don't really make the cut, but they're okay now and then. Let's go back to the store. Okay, so now that we've broken down the almonds a little bit and explained a little bit more about the omega-6 profile and how that's not exactly the best thing and how that's more important than the omega-3s, let's take a look at Brazil nuts. Okay, everyone touts Brazil nuts as this amazing food because they're high in selenium. Okay, that's great, but you can get selenium from so many different things, like your meat sources and stuff like that. I prefer Brazil nuts for the reason of their specific profile. So let's talk about them at the studio a little bit. Brazil nuts, all right. So omega-3 content, 0.14 grams. Negligible, hardly enough to do anything. 5.8 grams of omega-6s. So a better ratio technically than almonds, since almonds were 0, but still not amazing. So what's the benefit that we're really getting from Brazil nuts then? Well, again, it comes down to the selenium, it comes down to that, but also they're a low phytic acid nut. So what that means is they have less of this destructive component in it that makes it so they don't digest. Almonds have a lot of phytic acid. I'm not going to spend a lot of detail on that. Brazil nuts, just limit yourself to 1, maybe 3, something like that, 10, 12. Okay, now that we've talked about Brazil nuts and almonds, we need to talk about cashews. Now, cashews have a dirty little secret, all right? They're daunting, they're weird little guys. They are typically a keto destroyer, and I'll tell you why before we even go to the studio. They're super high in carbohydrates, so they're not exactly a keto nut to begin with, but they're also super high in phytic acid, so it's a little bit tricky because the omega-3 content makes them seem like they're actually a really good nut. But anyway, let's break them down in the studio a little bit. Like I mentioned in the store, they are very high carb. They are also extremely high in phytic acid. What is wild about them is it's actually not a terrible omega-3, omega-6 ratio. They have 0.04 omega-3s, but only 2.2 omega-6s. So when you only look at that, you say, well, that's actually not bad. They're not tremendously high in omega-6s, but you would end up going over your carb content very, very quick. So you see a lot of like cashew nut butter and cashew flour stuff, which is okay in moderation, but you want to go easy. It's not one that you want to load up on a bunch. Okay, cashew butter is delicious, but try to be careful of it. By the way, I recommend you check out down below. Perfect Keto has a really good macadamia nut butter that is like the best nut butter I've ever had. So it definitely takes the cake in place of cashew nut butter and stuff like that. The reason I mention it is because it's got a pretty similar taste to it, because cashew nut butter is really smooth and buttery, while their macadamia nut butter, like their vanilla bean flavor, is so unbelievably good. There's a special link down below so you can save a couple of bucks. Go ahead and use that special link down below. If you're a viewer of my channel, you get special pricing on Perfect Keto nut butter, macadamia nut butter. Please, please, please don't want to miss out on this. Check them out. So now you know the dirty details about cashews. Let's jump over to one that I quite like, that I think is underserved in the keto market specifically, which is hazelnuts. Okay? Hazelnuts, I don't think they have roasted. Actually, yeah, they do. Yeah, dry roasted. Always want to go dry roasted, by the way. It means they're not going to be roasted in oil, they're dry roasted. So it means they're not adding additional oils that are bad or anything. So in this case, hazelnuts have something unique going for them, and I'll explain why. Still not the most amazing fatty acid profile, but let's break them down a little bit. Here's the thing. 2.2 grams of omega-6s, 0.03 grams of omega-3s. Still not a good ratio. However, because of the actual mechanical kind of makeup of hazelnuts, they make a really good flour. Okay, so in the world of all the different nut flours that are out there on keto or low carb diets, hazelnut flour is going to be the best flour to use, because cashew flour just is too buttery, doesn't really work. Almond flour, for obvious reasons like we talked about earlier, and then you start getting to these other ones that are like blends and stuff like that. Hazelnut flour works really good. So although it's not the best omega-3, omega-6 ratio, it's a tremendous one to use as a flour. So if you're baking, try hazelnut flour. Pretty low phytic acid content in it as well, but again, pretty low in those omega-3s. All right, now we have winner macadamia nut dinner. These are the bee's knees, all right? So we're gonna break these down because these are the keto goat. They are the greatest of all time, not just because of their fatty acid profile, but just because the world of benefits and a unique fat that they bring to the table. So let's talk about it. The Mac nuts. Check this out. 0.06 omega-3s. Sounds low, right? Well, guess how much omega-6s? 0.368. It is super low in omega-3s and super low in omega-6s. Does that mean that it's a healthy nut? Yeah, it does, because it's high in a unique fat called omega-7, palmitoleic acid. But that's not even really the big piece here. If you were to eat more than 3 or 4 ounces of nuts, which is not hard to do, most of the time you're going to end up with a significant omega-3, omega-6 imbalance in your body. You could go to town on macadamia nuts because they're not going to throw off that ratio. So if you like to munch on nuts, macadamia nuts are going to be the nut to munch on. But like I said in the store, you might have to take out a second mortgage on your house just to be able to afford them all the time. So it's good to combine them now and then with some other fats, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, it's hard to top macadamia nuts. Honestly, you just can't. You could stop the video right now. Just eat a bunch of macadamia nuts. But you're gonna go broke, you're gonna have to sell your house. You might even have to sell your cat. But we can still talk about some other ones. Now here's pecans. Roasted salted pecan halves. I like pecans because they're easy to digest mechanically. They're soft. They don't disrupt your digestive system that much, but the fat profile leaves a little less to be desired. Let's talk. What's funny is if you watch a lot of keto channels, they'll say pecans are rich in omega-3s because they have 0.26 grams of omega-3s per ounce. Compared to some of the other ones that have 0.014, yeah, that's a decent amount of omega-3s, but do you know how many pecans you'd have to eat to actually get a sufficient amount of alpha-linolenic acid? You'd have to eat a dump truck full. You'd end up loading up on 10,000 calories just to get a sufficient amount. You're better off to wolf down a can of sardines, okay? But the cool thing about pecans, if you have them in small amounts, they don't tend to mess up the digestive system as much because they're easy to break down. I mentioned that in the store. The omega-6 content is still 5.6 grams per ounce. That's heavy. The next one they didn't have at the grocery store, okay? And that's PILI nuts. PILI nuts are a really interesting fat. Okay, yes, they have about 2 grams of omega-6s and about 2 grams of omega-3s, so pretty equal ratio. But the overall fat, most of the fat is saturated fat. So they're a very unique fat in that they don't have as much of the omega-3 or omega-6s. The bulk of it comes from a good, healthy, saturated fat, okay, mainly palmitic acid. So really a good balancing fat to have with macadamia nuts. So that's what I would typically say. Have my macadamia nuts, which are kind of a net neutral omega-3, omega-6 ratio, combine them with the PILI nuts. Okay, now one that you're not typically gonna munch on, but you're gonna have in small amounts, pine nuts. Pine nuts. They're sneaky, deceiving, just freaky little things. Like, first of all, they look freaky. They give me goosebumps because they're just weird looking. But when we actually break down what's in them, it really will scare the daylights out of you. We're gonna talk about the omega-6 profile. Let's break it down. So like I said in the store, these are sneaky ones. Pine nuts have 9.4 grams of omega-3s per ounce. And they only bring in 0.05 grams of omega-3s. That is a dismal ratio. Now, pine nuts have some unique properties as far as like antioxidant capabilities, but what good is an antioxidant if your omega-3, omega-6 profile is totally out of whack? And just to make matters like actually make some sense here, the reason that we always want this balance is because omega-6s trigger what are called type 2 prostaglandins, okay? They trigger an inflammatory response via those prostaglandins that causes inflammation in our body. It's part of the system to trigger inflammation, whereas when we have omega-3s, they trigger type 1 and 3 prostaglandins that block that process more. So they actually block inflammation, whereas omega-6s trigger it. So pine nuts, you really want to use in moderation, and you really want to make sure that you're having them with like a seafood dish that would normally be counteracted with significant amounts of omega-3. Now, sneaky walnuts. Spoiler alert, they are the most omega-3 rich nut, but there's a big issue that we're gonna face with them. So let's go ahead and break them down. In this case, we only have raw. With walnuts, I do try to go roasted because the phytic acid content is a little bit higher and at least breaks down a little bit if it's roasted. So we gotta be careful with that. So let's go to the studio and let's break these down. The winner of the omega-3 content, like we said in the store, has a mysterious kind of allure to it. The walnut has over 2.5 grams of omega-3s per 1 ounce serving. That's a lot of omega-3s. That's pretty awesome. But guess what the omega-6 levels are? The omega-6 levels are over 10 grams per 1 ounce serving. Terrible ratio. Still actually better than some, but the overall volume of omega-6s you're getting in are not very good. However, because it does have a decent amount of omega-3s, you'd be okay to have like a ½ ounce serving on a salad or something. They're also easy to digest. I'm not here to demonize a bunch of nuts. I'm just saying these are the ones you want to skew the most of. So have lots of macadamia nuts, have lots of PILI nuts, have hazelnut flour or use hazelnuts when you want for baking and for cooking. Go easy on the pecans. Try to back off the almond overload for a little while. Cashews should be a treat, not something that you try to enjoy all the time on keto. And honestly, just be careful of pine nuts. They're weird. Okay? See you tomorrow.